Hello. You wanted to know about those outlier Yokozuna runs? Well, we're back, and we got details. Stop throw!
Throw the salt, get in the ring. Welcome to the Dohyo.
Hello and welcome back to the Dohyo here on Mr. J-Wag's channel. This is a very special episode. This is sort of a continuing appendix to a previous episode, episode 122. What is a Yokozuna Run Really? Right there. And that turned out to be much more of a stat-based episode. I looked through a whole bunch of Yokozuna runs and figured out what makes a Yokozuna run in the modern era. But in doing so, I found out that I was really writing two episodes. The episode you saw about the stats, and this episode, which is about the stories. Obviously, when you have a standard of promotion, you are going to have people that barely clear the bar, people who don't clear the bar, and people who way overshoot the bar. So we are going to be talking about their stories today. But first, a few ground rules. Number one, we are only going to be looking at stats from 1958 onward. That is considered the start of modern sumo and the 6 basho a year system. And those of you who are big fans of the Yokozuna Run episode know I ran a second parallel dataset from 1987 on, because two things happened in 1987 that affected sumo. Number one, in May of that year, the first non-Japanese ozeki Konishki was promoted. And at the end of that year, we had the Futahaguro scandal, where Yokozuna Futahaguro was forced to retire without ever having won a Yusho. So as we noted in episode 122, there is a definite difference between the standard before 1987 and after 97. As we're covering about 70-75 years of sumo history, there are going to be some wrestlers with very similar names and some wrestlers with identical names. I'm going to do my best to keep all of those separated. And as is the case when you've been doing a YouTube sumo show for about 4.5 years, I have covered a lot of these stories in previous episodes. So whenever that happens, I'll just throw you to that link and you'll be getting sort of the TLDR of that wrestler's story. So, to recap, the standards for making Yokozuna post-1987 are: you must be an ozeki in good standing, no kataban, with at least 3 basho at the rank. You must have won at least 1 yusho in the sanyaku, it doesn't have to be ozeki. You must win 2 consecutive yusho or yusho equivalent, and we figured out that the very minimum bar for that seems to be 12-win jun yusho or better. The wrestler must win 25 or more matches over those consecutive yusho or equivalent. Meeting these criteria does not guarantee a promotion, and other factors may be taken into consideration, including a candidate's previous ring excellence and or the current number of healthy Yokozuna. So here we are at our very first category, borderline promotions. These are wrestlers who were promoted by the previous standard, the pre-1987 standard, but still made it all the way up and got the rope. And just to get this out of the way, 72nd Yokozuna Kisano Sato was not a borderline promotion. He totally qualified for the rope. It just took him forever to get that first yusho, but by the time he got that first yusho, he had 12 jun yusho. Let us not forget, before he got the rope, Kisano Sato got 4 jun yusho in a year, twice. First of many, already did an episode about that. And then moving on to sort of the elephant Yokozuna in the room, 60th Yokozuna Futahaguro. Well, to be fair, he did beat the pre-Futahaguro standard. In May of 1986, he got a 12-3 jun yusho, followed that up in July with a 14-1 playoff loss. So that got him to 26 wins over 2 at ozeki. And in his 14-1 playoff loss, he ended up beating Chiyonofuji on day 15 before losing to him in the playoff. His only loss that tournament was to future Yokozuna Hokuto Ume. Now, any of you who know sumo history know that Futahaguro, of course, is the only Yokozuna to never win a yusho. So obviously, he didn't quite pass that level of the standard. But I will point out, he seems to have been instrumental in helping create that standard. Now, if we go all the way back to 1942, Terukuni was promoted to Yokozuna with no yusho, but he ended up winning one, his first yusho, in 1950, 8 years after promotion. So there is pre-modern sumo precedent for the idea of promoting someone who we think is Yokozuna worthy, and yeah, they'll win a yusho later. Ooh, it didn't happen. Of course, there was a giant behavior scandal with Futahaguro, and that he was beating some of his tsukabito, alleged to have struck his stable master's wife, although never quite proven. And of course, he was then sort of kicked out of sumo with no real say in the matter. So the question on my mind was, if we had Yokozuna at the time, why was he the one who was promoted when he hadn't won a Yusho? So the first question I gotta ask is, were there any other ozeki? Yes, there were 5 ozeki at the time, and Futahagaro, then called Kitao, was only one of them. Now, 3 of those ozeki had in fact won Yusho, but they were past their prime. Asashio, not the Asashio we are about to talk about, this was Asashio 4, Hokutenyu, and Wakashimazu. And the 5th ozeki, Onokuni, who is in fact the Onokuni we are about to talk to in a second, was there, but he had not quite hit his peak yet. Now, there is an argument to be made that Chiyo no Fuji was looking a little bit old as the sole Yokozuna, and that's so true. He was 31 at the time, and after that championship where he beat Kitao, he only stuck around for 4 more years, winning 14 more championships. Totally one foot in the grave. But of course, the sumo's powers that be could not have known that, so they promoted Futahagaro. And since this is, in fact, one of those things I think sort of changed the standard, I will give this a borderline promotion that he did meet the standard, because Futahagaro changed the standard, if that makes sense. Now, if we look back to episode 122, we talked about the concept of the dip. Now, back before 1987, we had a few Yokozuna who were promoted with one great tournament, one meh tournament, and then another great tournament, and the powers that be decided, now we'll give you that dip. It'll be like, hey, you had a great tournament, you better do well this tournament. Didn't. All right, well, you better get X number of wins in the next tournament, and then they would, and would get promoted. The next few borderline promotions explore the dip. Next up, 46th Yokozuna Asashio, who was the 3rd to take the name, as opposed to the 4th, who we just talked about. This is number 3. Now, his Yokozuna run took place from November of 1958 to March of 1959. At age 29, he ended up getting a 14-1 Yusho, his 4th, followed by an 11-4 Jun Yusho, and then followed that with a 13-2 Jun Yusho. And as a part of that 13-2 Jun Yusho, he beat both Yokozuna. Now, those 2 Yokozuna, Tochinishiki and Wakanohana, this was Wakanohana 1. Now, Tochinishiki is fascinating because at this specific time he was 34, so the JSA may have thought it may be time to find ourselves a new Yokozuna, but at the time, Tochinishiki was doing arguably his best sumo ever. He was in the middle of a 7 basho stretch of getting Yusho or Jun Yusho. The other Yokozuna, Wakanohana 1, he was also performing well, but at 31. Now, Asashio was 29, so we're not looking at like, hey, here's a youngster who's going to get a lot more years, but he was a few more. Perhaps they were expecting Tochinishiki to be retiring soon, and because there was such a strong rivalry at the time with Tochinishiki and Wakanohana, they may have just wanted another Yokozuna up to maintain the idea of that Yokozuna rivalry. So Asashio did get promoted, Tochinishiki did retire fairly soon after that. Asashio won 4 of his Yusho before he became Yokozuna, only won 1 of them after. 4 of those Yusho were in Osaka, and the other one was in Fukuoka. So he was a 5-time winner and never once won a Yusho in Tokyo. This brings us to the story of 47th Yokozuna, Kashiwado. Now, Kashiwado's Yokozuna run is so unique, I almost couldn't include it in the post-1958 rankings because it's just weird. It appears as though Kashiwado has a 5-basho Yokozuna run. Follow me on this. All right, so we are looking at January through September of 1961. So he's already at Ozeki. He wins his first Yusho in January with a 13-2. He then gets a Jun Yusho 12-3 after that. Then 10-5, 11-4, before finally getting a 12-3 playoff Jun Yusho for his 5th Jun Yusho. Now, remembered when we were discussing the Yokozuna standard and we said other factors may come into it, including the current health of the Yokozuna? Well, it appears that this was one of the big reasons. There were 2 Yokozuna at the time. In fact, they were the ones we were just talking about, Wakanohana 1 and the new Yokozuna, Asashio. So, we're 2 years later, Wakanohana is now 33, and he had gone Kyujo in 3 of his previous 6 basho before this tournament, and in fact would only complete one 15-day basho after this tournament. Asashio, who we just talked about, was in even worse shape. He had gone Kyujo in 2 of his last 3 tournaments and never finished a tournament after this one. So at this point, the JSA was like, we need more Yokozuna, so managed to promote Kashiwado and his bestie/rival, Taiho. Perhaps you've heard of him, both at the same time. So once again, the JSA putting a lot of stock in the idea of rival Yokozuna, and that carries over to our next story, Tamano Umi, the 51st Yokozuna. Longtime fans know we did a very, very deep dive on Tamano Umi and his whole career. One of our better, classic episodes. So if you haven't checked that one out, it's great. But this also explores the dip, and it also explores the idea of we have an old Yokozuna who may need to be replaced rather soon. And in this case, the Yokozuna was Taiho, who we just talked about. So Tamano Umi's Yokozuna run was September 1969 through January of 1970. He started off with a 13-2 for his second Yusho, then got a 10-5, then came back with a 13-2 playoff loss to friend, rival, and bestie Kitano Fuji. And then the two of them, just like Kashiwado and Taiho, were promoted together as rival Yokozuna. And continuing, and nothing bad ever happened after that. Just watch the end. Our final borderline promotion and possible winner for best timing in sumo history goes to 62nd Yokozuna Onokuni. That's not throwing shade on Onokuni. He absolutely deserved his promotion, but they did give him a little bit of a dip. So this was May to September of 1987. Onokuni is 25 and he ends up getting his first Yusho, and it's a Zensho. He follows that up with a 12-3 June Yusho. Some would consider that already meeting the standard, but next tournament he ended up getting a 13-2 June Yusho, which ended up getting him the promotion. Now the reason I say the timing for Onokuni was so excellent was because this happened during Konishki's Ozeki run, and it happened right before the Futahaguro scandal. So it just feels like the door got a little bit smaller right after he walked through that door. So good on you, Onokuni. So this brings us to the near misses. You may notice that a lot of the borderline promotions were pre the 1987 scandals, and all of the ones that are the borderline misses are after the 1987 scandals. And so we have to start with Konishki, I guess the proverbial elephant in the room. Konishki was the very first foreign-born Ozeki, and there didn't seem to be a problem with that. After all, we had Takamiyama, the first American to win a Yusho, the very first foreign-born person to win a Yusho in Japan. In 1987, Konishki made a very normal Ozeki run. He got 33 wins over 3 Basho. He ended up getting a Junyusho and 2 special prizes. Yeah, totally normal Ozeki run. But after that, they started to get a little bit worried. And we've talked about this at length on this channel before. If you have a national sport that is totally tied up with your national identity, what does it mean when people who are not from your nation are better than you at your national sport? This was a big issue at the time. A lot of people were wondering if someone who was not Japanese born could have the spirit to even be a Yokozuna. They can. We now know they can. Now, under the old rules, Konishki could have gotten a Yokozuna promotion via the dip. If we look at November of 89 through March of 1990, you'll see he has an excellent case to be made. A 14-1 Yusho, followed by a 10-5, and then back up with a 13-2 playoff loss. And in that 13-2 playoff loss, he beat Yokozuna's Hokuto Umi and Chiyono Fuji. Quick sidebar. Okay, so Konishki did beat Hokuto Umi in this tournament, but he also lost twice to him in that tournament because it was a 3-way playoff. Now, for those of you who don't remember how 3-way playoffs work, everyone draws lots, 1 wrestler sits, 2 wrestlers face off, winner stays. Whoever wins 2 in a row first is your champion. So the way the March 1990 tournament ended was a 3-way playoff between Konishki, Hokuto Umi, and then Ozeki Kirishima. Not our current Kirishima, but his Oyakata. So Konishki lost to Hokuto Umi on day 14 of the regular season, and then in the 3-way playoff, Konishki ended up beating Hokuto Umi to open the playoff. Konishki then lost to Ozeki Kirishima. Ozeki Kirishima then lost to Hokuto Umi, who then stayed in the ring and beat Konishki to win the championship. No larger point on this one. I just love a good 3-way playoff. Quick sidebar. So we fast forward to May of 1991 through March of 1992. This section of sumo is really the only other plausible Yokozuna run for Konishki. So let's look. Now, in May of 1991, Konishki got a 14-1 playoff loss Jun Yusho. This was his 8th Jun Yusho, and he lost twice to Yokozuna Asahi Fuji on day 15. This was followed by a 12-3, his 9th Jun Yusho, where he went 2-0 versus the Yokozuna, Hokuto Umi, and Asahi Fuji. Now, as we mentioned on the previous Yokozuna episode, this is the only instance of an Ozeki getting 26 wins over 2 tournaments and not being eventually promoted to Yokozuna. The only time. And as we can see by the standard, he has passed all of the standards at this point. This is the only case where I can see where the standard was clearly met, but was not followed through with a promotion, at least eventually for that wrestler. And then if we move ahead to November through March, you will see 2 13-2 Yusho flanked by a 12-3. So once again, the standard is met. We have 25 wins there, which as we've shown can be considered the Yokozuna standard, flanked by 2 separate Yusho, but still was not given the rope. So at this point, the JSA and the YDC seem to have laid down a very hard line to cross. You must win 2 Yusho in a row. Equivalent seems to have gone by the wayside for a bit. And after that, Konishki never really had the health to make another Yokozuna run. And as us sumo historians know, at the beginning of 1993, Akebono became the first foreign-born Yokozuna after winning 2 consecutive Yusho. Next up on near misses, we knew we were going to get to him, Ozeki Kaio. And yes, you happen to be in luck. We have explored this one in detail in a previous episode. We go through all of Kaio's championships and why they didn't necessarily turn into a Yokozuna run. But here is the TLDR. Now, there are 2 points in Kaio's career we had a really strong case for that Yokozuna rope. The first one, from March to July of 2001, it would have required a dip. Now, Kaio would have needed a big dip for this. So in March, he ended up getting a 13-2 Yusho, and then in May, he got 4 wins. He went Kyujo, ended up going Kataban, and then came back, 3rd Yusho, 13-2. So we would have needed a very strong dip. So I understand why he wasn't necessarily promoted for that. But fast forward to the end of 2004, and in the September and November Basho, he got very close. Now, after winning his 5th and what we now know was his final Yusho with a 13-2 in September of that year, they said, all right, if you get 13 wins in your next one, even if you don't win, you're going to be a Yokozuna. And he got 12. And as we did mention in that episode, one of his losses was to a Maegashira named Hakuho. So going all the way back to the idea of the shadow of Hakuho, yes, Hakuho could have stopped Kaio from being a Yokozuna. But yeah, a 13-2 followed up with a 12-3. A number of rikishi have been promoted with that before, but Kaio didn't quite get it. Now, the next 2 wrestlers I'm going to sort of put together because it's a similar story. Ozeki Chiyo Taikai and Ozeki Baruto. And coincidentally, I have done episodes on both of these guys in the Shadow of Hakuho series, if you wanted to check those out. Now, both of these wrestlers, Chiyo Taikai in 2002 and Baruto in like 2011, 2012, they had the exact same records that got them to a Yusho and 25 wins over 2 tournaments at Ozeki, which is the standard. But it's the way they got those wins. Both of them got an 11-4, followed by a 14-1 Yusho. Now, as we know from, well, this episode, we have 2 cases where a Yokozuna had an 11-4 in their Yokozuna run, Asashio and Kashiwado, just flip back for that. We have never had an 11-4 to a 14-1 because we have essentially gotten rid of the dip. Now, if we look at the basho surrounding Baruto's Yusho, we'll see he really had no chance for a dip. But if we look back to Chiyo Taikai, we have a stronger case. Now, if you look at Chiyo Taikai's basho before the possible Yokozuna run, he had a 13-2 playoff loss, and then he went Kataban for the next round before coming back with an 11-4 and a 14-1. So there's a possibility they could have squinted and looked at that 4 basho range in there, but that Makekoshi probably would have taken it right out. So no dip for you, Chiyo Taikai. Sorry. And our last near miss, and we have done many episodes about this wrestler, Ozeki Takakeisho. Now, the Battle Hamster has gotten very close to promotion twice in his career. Of course, the most recent one was a little over a year ago. It was November of 22 and January of 2023, in which he got a 12-3 Jun Yusho, followed by a 12-3 Yusho, which adds up to 24 wins. And no, we have not seen post-1987 any Yokozuna promoted with only 24 combined wins on their run. But if we look back just a few years to the fall of 2020, I think we'll see a stronger case. Now, in September, he got a 12-3 Jun Yusho, but he followed that up with a 13-2 Yusho, getting him to the 25-win standard. So what happened? Now, one might look at that Banzuke and say, well, there were already 2 Yokozuna on the Banzuke. Why would we need another one? Well, in both of those tournaments Takakesho got the Jun Yusho and the Yusho for, none of the Yokozuna performed. They were Kyujo for both of them. Both of them! And that might lead you to say, well, if he couldn't defeat the Yokozuna, clearly he wasn't ready to be a Yokozuna. Then they should have been in the ring, yeah? A more persuasive case, I think, against Takakesho in this case was that he was getting hurt a lot, and he wasn't necessarily upholding the Ozeki standard. 2 tournaments before this Ozeki run, he ended up getting a 7 and 8, making him Kataban. The next tournament, he did get to 8 wins, but then went Kyujo, that patented Takakesho hashtag 8 and out. So they may have just wanted to see just one more tournament of excellence before giving him a belt, which would allow him to take off tournaments at a time. And remember, we're talking about post-Kiseno Sato, so we were allowing Yokozuna to take a lot of Kyujo at this time. And as if to prove them right, Takakesho in the very next tournament went Kyujo. This brings us to our last group, Overkill. These are 2 wrestlers who had to prove themselves a few times to get themselves the rope. And it may not surprise you that these 2 Yokozuna were the ones promoted directly before and directly after Akebono. So we start with the 63rd Yokozuna, Asahi Fuji. Of course, former Yokozuna Asahi Fuji is best known in his current role as the Oyakata of the Isegahama stable, home to our current Yokozuna, Teruno Fuji. I feel pretty confident that if Asahi Fuji had had the career he had in the 80s, in the 60s, he would have been a Yokozuna years before he was eventually promoted. So yes, while 62nd Yokozuna Onokuni may have had the best possible timing, 63rd Asahi Fuji may have had the worst possible timing. The Futahaguro scandal broke right after his promotion to Ozeki. So not only was he dealing with all of the Konishki pressure, all the Akebono pressure, but also right there in the meat of the Futahaguro scandal. So he won his first Yusho in January of 1988, right after turning Ozeki. He then took 6 of the next 8 Jun Yusho, averaging over 12 wins a tournament. And in those 6 Jun Yusho, he had 2 playoff losses to Yokozuna Hokuto Umi, and in both cases, Asahi Fuji won their match in the regular Basho before losing in the playoff. So yes, just looking at that stretch, there were at least 4 different places I could see him passing the 25-win threshold, having already gotten a Yusho. So there's clearly something going on there where he's not getting promoted. Then after this stretch, he hit a bit of a rough period, had like 5 Basho where he only got 8 or 9 wins before returning strong. How strong? Well, in May and July of 1990, he ended up getting consecutive 14-1 Yusho to get the belt. He did not have a very long wrestling career after promotion, winning only 1 more Yusho, and fun fact, every single one of his Yusho was a 14-1. And Asahi Fuji had 4 Jun Yusho where he got 13 or more wins. Last and probably the most famous case of overkill in all of sumo history, Takanohana, but we're talking about Takanohana 2. So Takanohana 2 was of course the first Yokozuna to make a run after Akebono, who as I said before made it on his very first try at Yokozuna. So at this point in sumo history, things seem to be pretty set after the 1987 scandals. You need 2 Yusho in a row. No exceptions. There would be exceptions later on, but for right now, no. This is the timing of where we are in sumo. So what happened to Takanohana? Well, he just couldn't seem to get that second one in a row. So we're in 1993. After the January Basho, Akebono is promoted. So once again, talking about the old standard, Takanohana managed to clear this one pretty quickly in May and July of 1993. He got a 14-1 for his 3rd Yusho, and then he got a 13-2 playoff loss, where he did beat Akebono on day 15 before immediately losing a playoff to him. And just to set the stage for Takanohana at this point, it's not like he had barely cleared this just once. At this point, he was only 20 and had 3 Yusho and 3 Jun Yusho. That's younger than Atami Fuji is right now. He was so young he couldn't even toast the traditional sake at his first Yusho. Young. So there may have just been an idea of he's young, he's healthy, he'll get there eventually. It took him a little while. So if you look at that first Yokozuna run in 1993 ending in July, he follows that up with a 12-3 Jun Yusho. He ended up winning his 4th Yusho after going Kataban, so of course he would need something strong after that, and after his 4th Yusho, 11-4. But then he followed that up with a 14-1 Yusho, so right after that, no, 11-4, okay. Then after that, 6th Yusho, Zensho. They gotta give it to him here, right? Well, it was actually pretty close. The JSA nominated for him at that point after winning his 6th championship, and it was a Zensho. They nominated him, but the Yokozuna Deliberation Council said nah, and declined the recommendation, which had not happened in 25 years. So at this point, Takanohana was just like, all right, we're gonna do this, and he ended up getting his 7th Yusho, his 2nd consecutive Zensho, to finally get the Yokozuna rope. And he would go on to win 15 more Yusho as Yokozuna. Takanohana was, in fact, the very first Ozeki to get his Yokozuna rope with 2 consecutive 15-day Zensho records, which was later equaled by Haramafuji. So other than the fact that I love historical-based and chart-based episodes, other than that, why are we here today? Well, we seem to be approaching a point right now where we are going to be out of Yokozuna very soon. As much as I love Terunofuji, I don't think anyone expects him to really be wrestling at this point next year. So who of our current crop of what seems to be relatively below average Ozeki, or possibly young hotness coming up, might have a chance in the near future? I think the first thing we can learn is that these rules are not written in stone. They can change with the facts on the ground. And I think if no one steps up in the next year to replace Terunofuji, we may see a return to the days of the dip. Number 2, 1987 was a year of change for sumo, and it is a sport that does not really like that much change. But after the promotion of Konishki to Ozeki and the retirement of Futahaguro, clearly things were very tight, especially at that moment in time. Things have not fully returned to the loosened standard of like the 60s and 50s, but as we can see with the promotions of Kakadu and Terunofuji, we're not holding ourselves to the tight must-be 2 Yusho standard anymore. And number 3, with the exception of Konishki and that one section where he won the 26/2, I do not see, in the numbers anyway, any pro-Japanese bias where it comes to the promotion of Yokozuna. If we consider that since our first non-Japanese Yokozuna, Akebono, there have been 10 Yokozuna from Akebono to Terunofuji, and of those 10, 7 of them have not been Japanese. In fact, of our last 7 Yokozuna, only 1 of them has been Japanese. So that tells me if there's this giant push to try to keep sumo Japanese, they're not doing very well. And if the JSA and the YDC were trying just to get that Japanese Yokozuna up there, they've had multiple opportunities to promote Takakeisho and have not given him the benefit of the doubt. So that tells me, Konishki accepted, the JSA and the YDC are trying to hold to a standard of principle over time. Whew, this one took a while to film, as you may have seen from the lighting changing in through my open window for this entire filming process. But thank you so much for watching. If you have not yet, please like and subscribe. That just tells the YouTube algorithm that more people want to watch the Dohyo, which is correct, right? Stay tuned to the channel. We have all of our September Basho coverage coming up, which means bolder predictions, mid-Basho quick strikes, and of course our exciting recap that you are not going to want to miss. So everyone, stay safe, stay strong, stay healthy, and I will see you next time on the Dohyo.